Olivia sat by the large bay window of her elegantly furnished apartment, sipping her morning coffee as the city hummed below her. 3 years ago, mornings like these felt impossible. She had been shattered, her heart broken into pieces by the man she once called her husband. Damien had been her world, and when he left her for Tiffany, it felt as if the very ground beneath her had crumbled. The humiliation of the public divorce, the pitying looks from friends, and the cruel whispers of betrayal had almost destroyed her. Almost. But today Olivia was no longer the woman Damien left behind. She had rebuilt herself, not just emotionally, but financially. She had carved a new path, one that led her to something far greater than the pain he had inflicted: motherhood. A soft giggle echoed from behind her, followed by the quick patter of little feet. "Mommy!" Two small figures rushed toward her, their identical faces lighting up with joy. Olivia knelt, opening her arms wide as her twins Ethan and Eliana ran into her embrace. At 3 years old, they were the light of her life, her greatest secret, and her most profound victory. No one, not even Damien, knew they existed. She had made sure of that. She had raised them in love, protecting them from the ghosts of her past. As she held them close, she knew one undeniable truth. Damien thought he had won when he left her, but she had already won the moment she chose to live for her children. Damien adjusted his cufflinks as he admired his reflection in the mirror. 36 years old, successful, wealthy, and soon to be a father. He had everything a man could ask for. Leaving Olivia had been the best decision of his life. He convinced himself that she had been a burden, always wanting more from him, always clinging too tightly. With Tiffany, things were different. She understood the power of status, of wealth. She was beautiful, ambitious, and most importantly, she wasn't Olivia. He smirked at the thought of his ex-wife. She must be miserable now, alone, forgotten. Tiffany's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Damien, we should go." She stood in the doorway of their grand penthouse, her hand resting on her barely noticeable baby bump. Damien beamed with pride. This was exactly how he had envisioned his life: a stunning wife, a child on the way, and an empire that was only growing. "I can't wait to see Olivia's face," Tiffany mused with a sly grin. "I hope she's still wearing that pathetic look of heartbreak." Damien chuckled. "Oh, she will be. Women like her never move on." As they left their home, Damien couldn't shake the satisfaction he felt. He was convinced Olivia had spent the last 3 years drowning in regret, still longing for the life he had taken from her. He had no idea just how wrong he was. 3 years ago, Olivia had stood in the ruins of her marriage, gasping for air as the divorce papers lay before her. Damien had made his choice. He had chosen Tiffany. The betrayal had been swift, public, and merciless. The man she had loved for years had discarded her like she meant nothing. The nights that followed were the hardest. She had cried herself to sleep, replaying every moment of their life together, wondering where she had gone wrong. But the pain of losing him paled in comparison to what she lost next: their unborn child. Stress and grief had taken their toll, leading to a miscarriage that left her feeling hollow. But Olivia wasn't a woman who stayed broken for long. In her darkest moment, she made a decision: she would be a mother, with or without Damien. Using the last remnants of their marriage, she accessed their stored embryos from the fertility clinic. It was a decision she made alone, without hesitation. Damien had abandoned her, but she would give life to the children he never knew existed. 9 months later, she held Ethan and Eliana in her arms, and for the first time since the divorce, she felt whole again. She had lost Damien, but in the process she had found something far more precious: her reason to fight. The transition from heartbreak to healing had been anything but easy. Olivia had spent nights nursing her twins, tears streaming down her face as she whispered to them about the world she would give them. She had no one, no family, no husband, and no safety net. Damien had taken everything when he left. But Olivia wasn't one to surrender. She dusted herself off and built a career, launching her own interior design business that flourished beyond her imagination. Slowly, she turned her pain into power. She became a woman who no longer needed Damien's love, approval, or money. Today, Olivia stood on the balcony of her newly acquired home, watching her children play in the garden below. Her heart swelled with pride. She had done this on her own. Damien had expected her to fall apart, but she had risen higher than ever. She smiled as Eliana called out to her, waving a tiny hand. "Mommy, are you happy?" Olivia felt the lump in her throat, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was victory. She knelt beside her daughter and whispered, "Happier than I've ever been, my love." And for the first time in years, she truly meant it. Damien parked his sleek black car outside one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, stepping out with the confidence of a man who owned the world. Tonight was the night. He and Tiffany had planned this moment perfectly, a grand event where they would flaunt their happiness, their success, their upcoming baby. He was eager to see Olivia's reaction when she realized just how much she had lost. Tiffany linked her arm through his, her eyes gleaming. "Are you ready for the show?" Inside, the restaurant was buzzing with the city's elite. Damien scanned the room, anticipation thrumming through his veins. And then he saw her, Olivia. But something was different. She wasn't the broken woman he had expected. No, she looked radiant, powerful even. And then his eyes drifted down to the two children at her side, two identical toddlers with his eyes, his features. His breath caught in his throat. The world around him blurred. What the hell was he looking at? Tiffany's grip tightened on his arm as realization dawned upon them both. Olivia had moved on, and she had done it in a way they never saw coming. Damien's entire world tilted as he stood frozen, staring at the two children clinging to Olivia. Twins. His mind screamed in disbelief. It wasn't possible. He had left Olivia 3 years ago, convinced she would never move on, that she would remain trapped in the misery of his absence. And yet, here she was, glowing, thriving, and holding two children who looked hauntingly familiar. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he took an involuntary step forward, but Olivia barely spared him a glance. She was talking to someone, a well-dressed businessman who leaned in close, whispering something that made her laugh. That laugh. It was light, carefree, nothing like the shattered woman he had walked away from. Tiffany's nails dug into his arm, her grip tightening. Whose children are those? Her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with uncertainty. Damien swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know." But deep down, a sickening realization clawed at him. He had an idea. Olivia finally turned, locking eyes with him, and the air grew thick with unspoken words. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then a slow, knowing smile played on her lips. "Damien," she said smoothly, her voice carrying no traces of the past heartbreak. "Tiffany." She let her gaze drop to Tiffany's barely noticeable baby bump, then back to Damien's face, her expression unreadable. He struggled to form words, but nothing came out. His mind was too busy racing, connecting dots that refused to make sense. The twins, were they his? Olivia tilted her head, almost as if she could hear his thoughts. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Her voice was polite, detached. Too detached. Damien had walked into this evening expecting to see a broken woman. Instead, he had walked straight into his worst nightmare. Tiffany's confidence, which had been rock solid just minutes ago, began to crumble. She had envisioned this night 1,000 times, Olivia sitting alone, consumed with regret, while she and Damien basked in the glow of their perfect life. Instead, she was the one feeling small. She gripped Damien's arm tighter, her gaze darting between him and Olivia. The resemblance was too strong. Those twins weren't just any children. They were Damien's spitting image. Olivia had barely acknowledged her, but that single glance had been enough to send an icy chill down her spine. Tiffany licked her lips, trying to compose herself. "We should sit down," she murmured, but Damien didn't move. His entire body was rigid, eyes locked on Olivia's every movement, every gesture toward the twins. Suddenly, Olivia's companion leaned in, whispering something that made her smirk. Damien's jaw clenched. Who the hell was he? Something about the man's presence set his teeth on edge. Olivia turned slightly, catching Damien's stare, and raised a single brow. "Something wrong?" she asked, amusement flickering in her eyes. Tiffany's stomach twisted. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. They were supposed to be the ones in control. Yet Olivia exuded an effortless power, as if she knew something they didn't. Damien finally snapped out of his trance, his voice rough with suspicion. "Whose kids are they, Olivia?" A silence fell over the table. Olivia's smirk didn't waver. Instead, she took a sip of her wine, her eyes locked onto Damien's with chilling confidence. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. But the way she said it, the way she looked at him, it wasn't a question. It was a warning. Damien couldn't shake the suffocating feeling closing in on him. "Why do you care?" Olivia's words repeated in his head like a taunt. Why did he care? Because those children had his eyes, his features, his damn DNA. He could feel it in his bones. His hand curled into a fist on the table as he watched Olivia laugh with the man beside her, completely at ease. The sight infuriated him. He had spent the last 3 years believing she was drowning in sorrow, and now she was looking at him like he was the ghost of a past she had already buried. The worst part? She wasn't denying anything. She wasn't confirming anything either. She was making him suffer. Tiffany shifted beside him, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for her glass of water. Damien could feel the tension radiating off her. She was worried. Tiffany leaned in, her voice low but sharp. "Damien, you need to find out the truth." He didn't need to be told twice. But before he could press Olivia for answers, a new presence entered the scene. A tall, dark-skinned man in an expensive suit strode into the restaurant, his sharp gaze landing directly on Tiffany. The moment she saw him, her entire body stiffened. Damien didn't miss the way her hand instinctively dropped to her stomach. The man smirked, taking slow, deliberate steps toward them before stopping just beside Olivia's table. "Long time no see, Tiffany," he drawled, his voice dripping with amusement. Damien turned to Tiffany, watching in growing confusion as her skin paled. Who the hell was this man? And why did Tiffany look like she had just seen a ghost? The air turned thick with tension. Damien could feel it. Something was about to break. Tiffany's fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, her eyes darting toward the man standing before her. Damien immediately sensed her unease, his gaze flicking between them. He wasn't stupid, something was off. The man, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, exuded confidence, his smirk deepening as he slid his hands into his pockets. "You look surprised, Tiffany," he said smoothly, his tone laced with amusement. "Didn't expect to see me?" Tiffany's throat bobbed as she struggled for words. Olivia, still seated, tilted her wine glass slightly, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. Damien's patience snapped. "Who the hell is this?" His voice was sharp, demanding answers. The man didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes darkened with something unreadable as he turned to Damien. "Ethan," he introduced himself, extending a hand that Damien didn't take. "Tiffany and I go way back." His gaze flickered to Tiffany's barely noticeable bump, and Damien felt the shift in the air. A sickening realization clawed at his gut. Why was Ethan looking at Tiffany's stomach like that? Tiffany finally found her voice, but it was weak, strained. "Damien, let's just go," she urged, trying to tug at his arm. But Damien wasn't moving. He could feel it. The foundation of his world was starting to crack, and Olivia, seated across from him, knew it too. Her lips curled into a knowing smile, and she leaned forward. "Maybe you should listen to him, Damien. You might not like what you're about to hear." Damien's blood ran cold. His grip on his glass tightened as he turned fully to Tiffany, whose face had drained of all color. There was only one reason she would react this way. His stomach twisted painfully, but he needed to hear it from her. "Tiffany," he said slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "Why does he think he has a right to speak about you like this?" Tiffany shook her head quickly, her eyes pleading. "Damien, please." But Ethan wasn't going to let her escape. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You didn't tell him?" His eyes flicked back to Damien, and what he said next sent a cold chill through the air. "You're celebrating a pregnancy that isn't even yours." The room fell into silence. Damien's jaw locked, his vision blurring with pure rage. "What did you just say?" His voice was no longer calm, it was lethal. Tiffany grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "He's lying, Damien. Don't listen to him." But she was cut off by Olivia's voice, smooth and deliberate. "Do you really think that's your baby?" The weight of her words crashed over him, suffocating. Tiffany yanked away from him, stepping back like a trapped animal. "Damien, her voice cracked. "It was a mistake." A sharp laugh left Olivia's lips. "Now you know how it feels." Damien felt the ground beneath him vanish. He had left Olivia for this woman, and she had betrayed him in the same way he had betrayed Olivia. Damien stormed out of the restaurant, his chest heaving with rage. The world around him blurred as he clenched his fists, trying to process what had just happened. The woman he had risked everything for had played him for a fool. His mind reeled, his stomach turning violently at the thought of Ethan touching Tiffany. Had she been lying to him this entire time? Had he spent the last 3 years building a future on nothing but deception? Olivia's voice echoed in his mind. Now you know how it feels. The cruelty of it all cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He had been so sure that leaving Olivia was the right decision, convinced that Tiffany was the better choice. And now he had lost everything. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, dialing Olivia's number without thinking. It rang, and for a second he allowed himself to hope. But when she answered, her voice was cold, detached. "What do you want, Damien?" His throat tightened. He had demanded answers from her earlier, had taunted her with his supposed happiness. Now he was the one drowning in uncertainty. "The twins," he finally said, his voice raw. "Are they mine?" There was silence, and for a moment he thought she had hung up. Then she let out a quiet exhale. "You lost the right to ask me anything 3 years ago." The line went dead. Damien stared at his phone, his pulse pounding. He had never felt powerless before. But now he knew what it was like to be left with nothing but regret. Tiffany sat alone in their penthouse, the city lights flickering through the large windows, casting shadows over her trembling frame. Her hands rested protectively over her stomach, her mind racing with thoughts of how everything had unraveled so fast. She had worked tirelessly to build this life with Damien, ensuring Olivia remained a forgotten name in their past. Yet, in one night, the walls of her carefully crafted empire had crumbled. Damien hadn't come home. He hadn't called. And she knew he was out there, digging for the truth. A soft knock at the door sent a wave of dread down her spine. She already knew who it was before she even opened it. Ethan stood on the other side, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. "You should have told him before I did." Tiffany's fingers tightened around the doorknob, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Leave, Ethan," she whispered. But he didn't move. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice lower, more dangerous. "You made your bed, Tiffany. Now you get to lie in it." Her eyes burned as tears welled up. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she choked. "I love Damien," Ethan scoffed. "Love?" He shook his head. "Then why were you in my bed while carrying his last name?" Tiffany's knees weakened, and she clutched the doorframe. She had convinced herself that Damien would never find out, that what had happened with Ethan had been a mistake, an impulse. But now she was faced with the undeniable truth. There was no escaping this. Damien was going to make her pay. Damien gripped his glass tightly, his knuckles white as he sat in a dimly lit lounge, swirling the whiskey in his hand. The bitterness of betrayal coated his tongue, heavier than the alcohol burning down his throat. The moment he had left the restaurant, he had gone searching for proof, for confirmation, for anything that would disprove the nightmare unfolding before him. But no matter where he looked, the truth remained the same. Tiffany had lied. The child she carried wasn't his. His best friend had fathered the baby she was so eager to flaunt. The weight of humiliation pressed down on him like an anchor. He had ruined his marriage for a woman who had betrayed him just as effortlessly. His jaw clenched as he reached for his phone. Olivia's name hovered on the screen, but he hesitated. How could he even begin to fix what he had destroyed? A familiar voice broke his thoughts. "You look like hell." Damien turned sharply to find Olivia standing a few feet away, her arms crossed as she observed him. She hadn't sought him out. This was coincidence, yet it felt like fate forcing him to face his past. His throat tightened as he took her in, the effortless way she carried herself now, a woman who no longer needed him. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked hoarsely. Olivia tilted her head. That Tiffany was cheating. "No, but I knew karma had a way of working itself out." Damien exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. "I never meant to hurt you the way I did." Olivia gave a soft chuckle, but there was no warmth in it. "That's the thing about betrayal, Damien. You never mean to destroy someone until you do." Damien sat motionless as Tiffany cried in front of him, her mascara smudging as she reached for his hand. Please, Damien, I can explain, she sobbed, her grip desperate. He yanked his hand away, his expression cold. Explain what? His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. That you've been sleeping with my best friend? That you've been lying to me for months? Tiffany shook her head violently. It wasn't like that. I love you, I swear. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. Damien let out a bitter laugh, standing to his full height. You weren't scared, Tiffany. You were selfish. He turned away from her, disgust curling in his stomach. He had left a loyal, loving wife for this. Tiffany's sobs grew louder, but he didn't care. The damage was done. He had paraded her around, had shamed Olivia, humiliated her, made her feel like she wasn't enough, only to be played for a fool himself. His chest tightened as he thought back to the moment Olivia had looked at him, that knowing smirk on her lips as she watched everything fall apart. She had been right. He had given everything up for nothing. He turned to Tiffany one last time, his voice void of emotion. We're done. Her breath hitched. Damien, please. But he was already walking away, leaving her behind the same way he had once left Olivia. The only difference? Olivia had rebuilt herself. Tiffany? She was about to lose everything. Damien stormed into his lawyer's office, his mind spinning. He needed answers. The thought of Olivia's twins haunted him, their resemblance to him, the way she had refused to answer his questions. There was no denying the connection. He had to know the truth. His lawyer, Mr. Calloway, adjusted his glasses as he flipped through a folder. Damien, I looked into this, and you're not going to like what I found. Damien clenched his fists, his patience wearing thin. Just tell me. Mr. Calloway exhaled, his expression grim. Before your divorce was finalized, Olivia underwent IVF. She used your frozen embryos. The words slammed into Damien like a freight train. What? His breath caught in his throat. You're telling me she had my children without my knowledge? Mr. Calloway nodded. Legally, she did nothing wrong. The embryos were stored while you were married, and she had full rights to use them before the divorce was official. Damien's heart pounded. His children, his blood, had been growing up without him, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. He shot to his feet. I want custody. Mr. Calloway shook his head. That's not possible. Olivia has full legal rights. You abandoned her, Damien. You left her with nothing, and the court will see her as the sole parent. Damien's world spun. For years he had thought Olivia had been the one left behind. Now he realized he was the one truly alone. He had lost Olivia, lost his marriage, and now he had lost his own children. And the worst part, Olivia had known this all along. Olivia stood at her office window, watching the city stretch out before her, a quiet strength in her stance. When Damien barged in, his face was thunderous. She didn't flinch. She simply turned, arms crossed. I assume you finally got your answers. His jaw clenched. You used my embryos. You took my children away from me. Olivia arched a brow, unbothered. No, Damien. You did that when you walked away from our marriage. His eyes darkened, but there was no room for argument. She had the legal upper hand, and she knew it. He took a slow, measured breath. I deserve to be in their lives. Olivia tilted her head. Deserve? She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. Deserve is a funny word coming from you. Did I deserve to be humiliated? To be discarded like I was nothing? To be left to mourn alone? His face tightened. Olivia, they are my children. She stepped closer, her voice low but firm. And where were you when I was carrying them? Where were you when I held them for the first time? When they said their first words? You weren't there, Damien. You don't get to walk in now and claim them. He swallowed hard, realizing the weight of her words. He had been so focused on himself that he had never once considered what she had gone through. Olivia exhaled and turned away. You lost the right to call them yours the moment you chose someone else over us. Damien stood there, defeated. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to lose. The scandal surrounding Damien spread like wildfire. The whispers followed him everywhere, at work, at the clubs, at business events. His phone rang constantly, investors pulling out, board members demanding explanations. His image was tarnished. The story of his betrayal, Tiffany's infidelity, and his secret children had reached the media. The same people who once admired him now looked at him with pity or disdain. He stormed into his office, slamming his fists against his desk. "Fix this," he barked at his assistant. But she hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Sir, there's nothing to fix. Your reputation. It's already ruined." His stomach twisted. He had built his empire on appearances, and now it was crumbling before his eyes. That night, he sat in his empty penthouse, staring at the city that once felt like his kingdom. Now it felt suffocating. His reflection in the glass mocked him. He had everything, a wife who loved him, a future he took for granted. And now, he had nothing. Olivia had moved on, thriving in ways he never thought possible. His children were growing up without him, their laughter filling a home he wasn't welcome in. And Tiffany? She had disappeared, leaving only the wreckage of their failed relationship behind. Damien ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. For the first time in his life, he had no one to blame but himself, and the realization crushed him. This was the downfall he never saw coming. Tiffany sat alone in a rundown motel, her hands cradling her growing belly as the weight of her choices crushed her. She had lost everything. The lavish penthouse, the security Damien provided, the status she once flaunted, all of it was gone. The same investors who once welcomed her with open arms now treated her like an outcast. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had publicly humiliated a powerful man. Ethan, the father of her unborn child, had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with her. She had reached out to him in desperation, her hands trembling as she dialed his number. The response had been swift and brutal. "I never promised you anything, Tiffany. You were just fun while it lasted." The line had gone dead, leaving her staring at the screen, the truth settling deep in her bones. She had destroyed Olivia's marriage for a man who had discarded her just as easily. With nowhere else to turn, she made the one call she had sworn she never would. Damien. Her fingers hesitated before pressing the dial, and when he answered, his voice was devoid of the warmth that had once drawn her in. "Tiffany." There was no anger, no emotion, just cold detachment. She swallowed hard. "Damien, I need help," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. A long silence stretched between them before he finally spoke. "And I needed honesty." The words cut deeper than she expected. "Please," she pleaded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I have no one." A bitter chuckle echoed through the line. "Now you know how it feels," he murmured before the call ended. Tiffany stared at the screen, realization crashing over her. She had clawed her way into Damien's life, believing she had won. But now, stripped of everything she understood, Olivia had been the real winner all along. Olivia stood at the entrance of her home, arms crossed as she watched Damien approach. He looked nothing like the man she once knew. The arrogance, the untouchable confidence, gone. His suit was slightly disheveled, his eyes haunted. But Olivia felt nothing. There was no anger, no lingering love. Just the quiet understanding that the chapter between them was closed. Damien took a slow breath, as if steadying himself. "I just want a chance to see them." His voice lacked the demand it once held, replaced with something unfamiliar, pleading. Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. "And where was that chance when I was alone, carrying them?" His gaze dropped, shame flickering across his face. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "But they're my children." Olivia's grip on the door tightened. "Are they?" Damien's head snapped up, confusion etched into his features. She let out a quiet exhale. "A father isn't just the man who shares their DNA, Damien. A father is there. He wipes their tears, kisses their scraped knees, tucks them in at night." Her voice softened, but there was no weakness in it. "You weren't there." Damien inhaled sharply, but he had no argument. He had lost his right to be in their lives, and Olivia wasn't about to let him waltz back in out of guilt. He took a shaky step back, nodding slowly. "You really won't give me a chance?" The ache in his voice was real, but Olivia had made her choice long ago. "Goodbye, Damien." She stepped back inside, shutting the door behind her, sealing the past where it belonged. As Damien stood alone on the doorstep, the weight of his actions fully sank in. He had lost Olivia, he had lost his family, and now he had to live with it. The sound of laughter filled Olivia's home as her twins ran through the living room, their small feet pattering against the wooden floor. She watched them, warmth spreading through her chest. This was her happiness. She had spent years fighting, rebuilding, and healing. And now she could finally say she had found peace. Damien was nothing more than a distant memory, a lesson she had survived. She had spent too much of her life waiting for a man who had never truly valued her, but those days were over. Now she was living for herself and for her children. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, she was met with a familiar, comforting presence. Alexander, he smiled, his gaze warm. Ready to go, Olivia exhaled, a small smile tugging at her lips. More than ever. As she stepped outside, hand in hand with the man who had always respected her, she felt a sense of finality settle over her. She had chosen herself. She had chosen to walk away from a love that had only broken her and embrace the love that lifted her higher. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, Damien sat alone in his once grand penthouse, staring at the empty space where his future should have been. He had won the battle years ago when he left Olivia. But in the end, Olivia had won the war. As the door to her past fully closed behind her, Olivia walked toward a future that finally, truly belonged to her. The chapter with Damien was over, and she had never felt so free. Tiffany sat on the edge of the worn-out motel bed, staring blankly at the cracked wallpaper as reality pressed down on her like an unbearable weight. Her designer clothes, once symbols of her victory over Olivia, now felt like a mockery of the woman she used to be. The few people who had once welcomed her at society events now ignored her calls. She had become a pariah, a walking scandal. The pregnancy that was once her weapon against Olivia had turned into her greatest burden. She had never planned for this, to be abandoned, to be without a man to anchor her status, to be utterly alone. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could have been if she had just stayed in her place, instead of trying to take what belonged to another woman. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. How had she gone from being Damien's trophy to a discarded, forgotten woman carrying the child of a man who refused to claim it? Desperation clawed at her as she picked up her phone, scrolling through her dwindling list of contacts. There had to be someone, anyone, who could help her. But one by one, the messages she sent were met with silence. Her last hope rested in Olivia. Swallowing her pride, she dialed the number she had once smirked at, the number of the woman she had stolen from. The phone rang, and when it finally connected, Tiffany's breath hitched. Olivia, please. I need help. A long pause stretched between them before Olivia's voice, calm and unwavering, filled the silence. You took everything from me, Tiffany. And now you want my kindness? Tiffany's lip trembled. I have nowhere to go. Another pause. That's not my problem. The call ended, leaving Tiffany staring at the screen in shock. For the first time in her life, she truly understood what it meant to have nothing. Damien sat in the dimly lit corner of an upscale bar, the ice in his untouched whiskey melting as he stared blankly ahead. His life had become a blur of silent suffering. No amount of wealth or power could fix the gaping hole left in his life. His phone, once buzzing with business calls and dinner invitations, was now eerily silent. The world he had built had turned its back on him. He was no longer the man people admired. He was the man people whispered about in scandalous undertones. His once loyal associates distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with his downfall. The company he had fought to expand was now barely holding on, shareholders losing confidence in him as both a businessman and a man. He had thought Tiffany's betrayal was the worst thing to happen to him, but losing Olivia had been the real loss. A familiar voice broke through the haze. You look like hell. Damien turned, his breath catching for a brief moment. Olivia. She stood before him, her expression unreadable, arms crossed. She was no longer the woman he could manipulate. He tried to muster a smirk, the same arrogance that had once made her weak, but it fell flat. Did you come here to gloat? Olivia tilted her head. I don't need to, Damien. You did this to yourself. His fingers curled around his glass. I miss them, he admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. Olivia Sihil. That's the difference between us. I missed you too once, but then I healed. You're still looking for something you threw away. She turned to leave, and Damien felt something inside him crack. She wasn't coming back. He had lost her forever. Sunlight streamed through the cafe windows as Olivia sipped her tea, the warmth of the moment settling deep in her bones. For the first time in years, she felt weightless. She no longer lived in the shadow of her past, no longer carried the burden of Damien's betrayal. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes he had left her in, and now she was free. Across from her, Alexander studied her with quiet admiration. He had been patient, allowing her time to heal, never pressuring her into something she wasn't ready for. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she realized she was ready. A slow smile curved her lips. "Thank you for waiting." Alexander's brow lifted. "Waiting for what?" She set her cup down, her heart calm. "For me to see what's right in front of me." His fingers brushed against hers, a touch that felt like a promise. "I would have waited forever." The sincerity in his voice made something deep inside her soften. Olivia had spent years believing love had to be fought for, that it had to be painful to be real. But this was easy, safe. It was everything Damien had never given her. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to embrace what she had always deserved: happiness. Meanwhile, across the city, Damien sat in his empty apartment, staring at his phone, Olivia's number highlighted on the screen. He wanted to call, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He knew the truth. Olivia was no longer looking back. Her future was unfolding without him. And for the first time in his life, Damien finally understood what regret truly felt like. Damien parked side Olivia's home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Words swirled in his head, apologies he should have made years ago, confessions that had once felt impossible to say. He had spent weeks in torment, replaying every mistake, every cruel decision that had led him here. He had lost his marriage, his reputation, his unborn child. But it was the loss of his twins, the ones he never even knew about, that haunted him most. He needed to see them, to make things right, even if he had no right to ask for anything. Exhaling sharply, he stepped out of the car and approached the front door, his pulse hammering in his ears. When the door finally opened, Olivia stood there, her expression unreadable. She had been expecting him. Before he could speak, she crossed her arms, her voice calm yet firm. "What are you doing here, Damien?" He swallowed hard. "I just want a moment. With them." Olivia didn't move, her gaze assessing him as if weighing whether he deserved the privilege. "They don't know you." The words sliced through him, but he nodded. "I know, but I want to change that." A bitter smile ghosted her lips. "You don't get to walk in and rewrite the past. You chose Tiffany. You chose to leave." His chest tightened, and it was the worst mistake of my life. A flicker of something, sadness maybe, passed over her face, but she quickly masked it. "Some mistakes can't be undone, Damien." She hesitated before delivering the final blow. "And some second chances don't belong to you." She shut the door, leaving him on the outside, where he had put himself long ago. Tiffany sat in the cold, sterile hospital room, her fingers trembling against the rough fabric of the hospital gown. Her body was weak, exhausted from labor, but the emptiness in her heart was far worse. The baby had come early, and there had been no one to hold her hand through the pain. No Damien, no Ethan. She had spent months believing that even if she lost everything, at least she would have her child. But as she stared at the tiny infant sleeping in the crib beside her, reality struck her like a cruel, final blow. She had no idea how to be a mother. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for her phone with shaking hands. There was only one person left to call. She pressed the contact and waited, her heart pounding in her chest. "Damien," she whispered when he finally answered. "I had the baby." Silence stretched between them. Then his voice came, emotionless. "Congratulations." Tiffany flinched. "Please, I need help. I can't do this alone." She heard a sharp exhale on the other end. "And you think I can, after what you did?" Her grip tightened on the phone. "I made mistakes, Damien, but so did you." A bitter chuckle followed. "And yet, only one of us is paying for them." Her breath hitched. "Please, just come see her." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Tiffany, but I'm done saving you." The call ended. The weight of his rejection crushed her, the truth unbearable. She had gambled everything and lost. The baby stirred beside her, unaware of the mess her mother had made of her life. And for the first time, Tiffany realized this was all she had left. Olivia sat on the balcony, a cool breeze sweeping through the evening air, the sound of laughter echoing from inside. Her twins were playing, their giggles pure, untouched by the pain that had once consumed her life. She had spent so long trying to prove she was stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the heartbreak. But tonight, as she watched the stars blink against the dark sky, she understood something she never had before. Happiness wasn't just about overcoming the past. It was about choosing the future. The sliding door opened behind her, and warm arms wrapped around her waist. Alexander. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his voice low. "You're thinking again," she smiled, leaning into him. "Always." He turned her to face him, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Let me ask you something." His expression was serious, yet soft. "Are you happy, Olivia? Not just surviving. Not just healing, but truly happy?" She stared at him, the man who had stood by her side, never demanding, always patient. She thought of the woman she used to be, the one who had begged for Damien's love, the one who had been crushed beneath his indifference. And then she thought of the woman she had become, the one who had rebuilt her life on her own terms. A slow, genuine smile spread across her lips. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady. "For the first time in a long time I am." Alexander kissed her forehead, and as the warmth of his love wrapped around her, she knew this was the life she was always meant to have. Damien was her past, but Alexander? He was her future. Damien sat in his once pristine penthouse, now a mere shell of what it used to be. The furniture, once meticulously arranged, was in disarray, half-filled whiskey glasses cluttering the table, and unopened letters stacking up on the counter. This was his reality now, empty, quiet, suffocating. He had lost his business connections. His influence in the industry was crumbling, and the respect he once commanded had vanished. But none of that compared to the deeper loss, the one that clawed at his soul every time he closed his eyes. Olivia, the twins, the life he had walked away from. He had spent years convincing himself he was the one who had won, that Olivia would always be stuck longing for him. But the truth had come crashing down. She had never needed him. She had risen without him, built something stronger, something that he could never touch again. His fingers hovered over his phone, Olivia's number still memorized despite the fact that he hadn't called in years. What would he even say? That he was sorry. That he regretted everything. That he would give up everything just to go back and choose her instead. The words felt empty, meaningless now. A knock at the door startled him. For a fleeting second, a ridiculous hope flickered, Olivia. But as he opened it, the face on the other side was unfamiliar. A courier handed him an envelope, then walked away without a word. Damien shut the door, tearing it open. His breath caught in his throat as he read the first few lines. Legal notification. Parental rights termination. Olivia was making it official. He would never have any claim to the twins, now or in the future. His heart pounded, his hands shaking as he reread the words, as if doing so would change their meaning. She was severing the last thread that tied them together. The finality of it hit him like a blow. He sank onto the couch, his chest constricting as an unbearable truth settled over him. He had spent so long thinking Olivia would always be a part of his life in some way. But she was gone, and this time there was no undoing it. Olivia sat on the floor of the nursery, watching her twins play, their laughter filling the room. They were the greatest thing she had ever done, her most precious victory. She had raised them in love, given them a home filled with warmth, and ensured that they would never know the pain she had once endured. They didn't need to know about Damien's absence. She had never spoken ill of him to them, never allowed bitterness to stain their innocence. But she had also never lied. When they had started asking about their father, she had given them the truth, that he had chosen another path, and that their family, though different, was whole. She would not let his mistakes define their future. She would not let his absence feel like a wound. They were loved, and that was enough. Eliana toddled over to her, resting her tiny hand on Olivia's cheek. "Mommy, are you happy?" Olivia's throat tightened, emotion swelling in her chest. "I am, baby." Ethan, his dark curls bouncing as he ran, plopped into her lap, giggling. "Love you, Mommy." Tears stung her eyes, but they were not from sadness. They were from overwhelming gratitude. "I love you both more than anything in the world." They had been born from heartbreak, from betrayal, but they had become her greatest joy. She tucked them both into her arms, holding them close. They would grow up knowing they were wanted. They would never beg for love from someone incapable of giving it. And in that moment, Olivia knew she had made the right choice in keeping Damien out of their lives. They didn't need him. They never had. Tiffany wandered through the unfamiliar streets, her newborn daughter cradled in her arms. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The woman who had once walked into restaurants with her head held high, parading her victories for the world to see, was now invisible. No designer clothes, no lavish home, no adoring whispers behind her back. Just a mother with an infant who had no father, no future mapped out for her. Ethan had blocked her calls, making it clear he wanted nothing to do with either of them. Damien had severed all ties, ensuring she could never return to the life she had once stolen. She had burned every bridge, and now she was drowning. She passed by a cafe window, her reflection catching her off guard. She looked nothing like the woman she had once been. Hollow cheeks, tired eyes, the weight of her choices pressing into her bones. Inside, she saw Olivia seated with a man, Alexander. They were laughing, the kind of laughter that came from true happiness, the kind Tiffany had never known. Her stomach churned with something bitter, jealousy, regret, maybe both. She had once believed she had won by taking Damien from Olivia, but now it was painfully clear Olivia had always been the one who won. Tiffany clutched her baby closer and turned away. There was no one left to envy, no one left to blame. Only herself. Olivia stood on the balcony of her home, watching the horizon as the sun dipped below the skyline. She had fought for this peace. She had earned it. Alexander stepped behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Ready to go in?" She turned to him, studying the man who had shown her what love should feel like. Safe, steady, unshaken by the past. She laced her fingers with his. "I am." Inside, their children, her twins, his niece and nephew, played together, their laughter blending into something beautiful. A family built not by blood, but by choice. Meanwhile, miles away, Damien sat in the darkness of his penthouse, staring at an old photo of Olivia. She had truly moved on. The papers in his hand confirmed what his heart had already known. There was no place for him in her life anymore. His phone sat silent beside him. No calls, no messages, no second chances. He had left Olivia once, believing he was trading up. But now, as he sat alone in the empire he had built, he understood Olivia had been the real prize all along. And he had let her slip through his fingers. She had won. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, but by choosing herself. And for the first time in his life, Damien finally understood what it meant to lose. Because the woman he had taken for granted was gone. And she was never coming back. Here's the Bible verse for the story. Proverbs 11, verse 3. "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity." This verse perfectly reflects the essence of the story. Olivia remained steadfast, choosing integrity, strength, and self-respect, even when she was abandoned. In contrast, Damien and Tiffany, who built their happiness on betrayal and deception, ultimately destroyed themselves. Their downfall was not caused by external forces, but by their own choices. In the end, those who act with integrity will always triumph over those who choose deceit. Moral of the story: the choices we make today determine the future we must live with tomorrow. This story teaches us that betrayal, greed, and selfishness will always come with consequences. Damien thought he could discard Olivia and build a better life, only to realize too late that he had thrown away something irreplaceable. Tiffany believed she could manipulate her way into power, but she ended up with nothing. Meanwhile, Olivia, though broken at first, chose to heal, rebuild, and move forward, ultimately finding true happiness. Lesson: never take good people for granted. The person you mistreat today might be the one you need tomorrow. Choose integrity over deceit, self-respect over desperation, and healing over revenge. Because in the end, true victory belongs to those who walk away from the past and embrace a future of their own making. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.